All right, welcome back to another T.REX talk. I want to introduce you guys to my brother Noah. You've not been on a T.REX talk before, have you?
Nope, this is my first time.
But you have been on some various Instagram things and in a couple of YouTube videos, so the viewers at home might know.
Right, yeah.
Might know
Our
you.
most dedicated fans know my face.
Yes.
And everyone else knows my face because they think I'm Luke. And that's why I'm here, because Lucas was too busy, so I'm his double.
Well, actually, the reason that you're here is you are the software developer for T.REX ARMS. You're the one that's the most knowledgeable about the internet, how the internet works, how programmers work, and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about internet manipulation and internet censorship. There's a bunch of people in the chat asking what the odds are that we actually get censored or manipulated during the stream by the internet tech giants.
I think it's pretty small.
I think it's pretty small because the main rule that YouTube has for live streams is not holding up guns. So we just won't talk about guns, coronavirus, election tampering, or anything like that, and we'll be fine. So T.REX ARMS, if you're watching this live on YouTube, then we're still on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast, 50-50 chance that we're still on YouTube. Kind of hard to say, but you can go to you can search us on iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify and all the normal podcasty places to find us. Also, you can do it old school. You can use RSS feeds to keep up with our podcast, which Noah's probably going to say is a cool way to do things and less dependent upon the platforms and the tech giants. So what we're talking about today is it seems like 2020 has been a year when lots of stuff has been revealed, and a lot of stuff that has been going on behind the scenes on some of the social platforms has actually been a little more obvious this year than previous years. A little bit more obvious manipulation, especially around the election. Twitter doing stuff like banning links to the New York Post and not allowing the New York Post to tweet one of their news stories about Hunter Biden. Stuff like that seemed way more obvious this year than previous years. So that is something that I think all people are paying a little bit more attention to, the biases of different platforms and the possibility that they are not simply neutral and as pure as the drivens know. What do you think, Noah?
What do I think? So I think Facebook and Instagram have pretty much always been evil. Twitter has been a more interesting situation because I think up until about a year ago, they were actually trying, like Jack Dorsey actually wanted Twitter to be an open platform. And he was actually, he started this initiative called the Blue Sky Initiative almost exactly a year ago. And the purported purpose of that initiative, it was a small team of programmers to build an open source version of Twitter that was decentralized, maybe it was federalized. I don't know what the exact system of governance was.
But it was going to be an open standard that anybody can use,
open standard,
like Mastodon.
Like Mastodon, I guess like Parler. I don't really know how Parler works. And eventually Twitter was supposed to move over to that open standard. And it's been crickets ever since. And I would guess that Blue Sky is not getting funding anymore because Twitter has gone super Orwell in the last few months.
Yeah, extreme Orwell. And they have done stuff like, when did they start doing blue check marks and verifying accounts?
Oh, that's been for a while.
That was a long time ago that they started doing that. But there seems to be a lot more shadow banning and adjusting of who can see what and when people can see certain things on Twitter. Instagram and Facebook have always been doing this. It was sometime in 2018 that Instagram began hiding firearm pictures on the Discovery feed or on the Explore tab or whatever it's actually called on Instagram. And that is something that one of the guys at Open Source Defense was actually at Facebook when that decision was made, and it was just a decision to basically hide gun content so that it was harder to find and harder to see. And I just did an experiment over the weekend on my Instagram channel. I posted a picture of a gun on one day, and I posted a picture of a radio on the other day. And they both got roughly the same amount of likes and roughly the same amount of comments, but the radio picture was seen by twice as many people because it showed up in Explore feeds. The hashtags worked, although they didn't work normally because hashtags are still technically broken and off on Instagram. They turned off the ability to see latest posts by hashtag because they didn't want election misinformation getting out. They didn't want people searching for election misinformation hashtags like Hunter Biden laptop or stuff like that. And so they turned off hashtags. Well, according to according to all these companies, the election is over and we have a clear winner. So there's no reason why they shouldn't turn some of these features back on. Those features may not be coming back anytime soon, actually. But it was interesting. Picture of a radio, twice as many views as picture of a gun, even though proportionally people liked the picture of the gun more and commented on it and liked it more. So yeah, that was a distinct, clear decision. And I didn't think that they made any announcements about it. But it turns out they do actually sort of mention this in the website. If you dig through the explanations of why certain things may not show up in the Explorer feed, they mention that they are hiding guns for their international viewers, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because figuring out where their subscribers actually are in the world is super easy. And building an AI engine that recognizes guns and hides them is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's probably easier than most people think. So they have an AI engine that actually does object recognition of guns and hides them from viewers globally, even though there's plenty of American folks who are allowed to own guns and allowed to take pictures of them because that's the thing we're allowed to do in America.
Are you allowed to take a picture through night vision and then post that online for
international that is a great
to see?
That is a great question.
I'm sure they don't check for that.
Technically, ITAR forbids me allowing foreign nationals to look through Generation 3 night vision. But taking a picture through Gen 3 night vision, probably don't go to jail for that. Because lots of people have been doing it for a long time and not going to jail. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing to consider. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is very opaque, and you have to sort of reverse engineer it. You have to run experiments like posting pictures of two different things to see what the response is, because these platforms are not very open. Occasionally, they will be clear. Like YouTube is pretty clear on what you are and are not allowed to do with guns on a live stream, and that is handle them or show them. And they have artificial intelligence watching this live stream right now. Yeah, they're still watching this live stream right now to see if we handle guns in it. And if we were to pick up a gun, it would end the live stream. And I actually understand that one because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and people have been using live streaming to show people all sorts of crazy stuff up to and including mass murder. So the easiest way to prevent that from happening, to prevent people from live streaming mass murder, is just to have the IA watch for guns and turn guns off. So I actually understand why that one is there on YouTube's channel. But then there's a lot of stuff that is not clear. There's a lot of channels that are no longer growing and they don't know why, and YouTube doesn't explain whether or not they're getting, why they're not getting recommendations in the feed anymore. Stuff like that is completely hidden behind the algorithm. It's not exposed in any way to the users of the site or the creators that work on the site. And that's true of all of these, all the main platforms.
And I think most people fail to grasp how huge the internet is and how huge YouTube is. And you know, when their account gets shadow banned or their reach gets reduced, they think, YouTube has it in specifically for me. But probably not. It's probably just the clumsy algorithm who caught you in a net of banned hashtags or keywords or shapes detected.
Yeah.
It's very clumsy.
Now, they probably have categories that they put people in. So occasionally a whistleblower will leak documents, and then you get a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. And there was something that Pinterest was doing. Pinterest was using certain hashtags to categorize certain users. And if they were using certain anti-abortion hashtags, those users got purposefully thrown into a category that had limited reach and limited features.
Didn't Veritas do something on that?
Yeah, I think Veritas was the one who originally leaked those documents. The whistleblower came to them and they leaked those documents. So some of this stuff is automated and accidental, but some of it's sort of purposefully automated, like using pro-life tags to try to create a category of pro-life users and then globally kind of affect those people differently than other people. But yeah, I would say that if you are not Steven Crowder, you're probably not getting personalized human attention from YouTube. You're getting caught up in an algorithm that a whole bunch of people have written. Yeah, and I think that we're probably in that algorithm too, because we see some weird stuff in our YouTube channel that doesn't jive with other YouTube channels of a similar size. and a similar demographic following us, but our subject matter is different, and we see very different results of certain videos. And I think it may be related to that, but again, it's impossible to know because the engine is opaque.
Totally opaque.
Yeah.
Now, apparently, and I need to read more about this, and I probably should read about it before I talk about it on video to the internet, but apparently, Google is required to release their ranking algorithm like 3 or so years old. So there's probably some interesting things that can be learned there, but I haven't checked that.
Somebody's asking, why are you guys still streaming this on the Google platform, bending the knee to the libs? This is the platform where the audience is. If we want to reach people and talk about this stuff, this is the best place to do it. And so, yeah, if you would like us to reach fewer people, we can do that in other places. But yeah, we're trying to use the most powerful tools that we have access to do what we're trying to do. And I think that we're pretty open about that, unlike some of these platforms who are very unclear about what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Yeah, it's hard to reverse engineer some of those things. But what are some of your thoughts? Because there's been a lot of back and forth. A couple of years ago, there were a lot of people who were conservatives saying that there was a bias against conservatives on some of these platforms, and mainstream media pushed back on that extremely heavily because there are one or two very successful, like if you look at Twitter and trending tweets on Twitter inside news or journalism, usually Ben Shapiro will be in that top 10. And so that is proof that there's no banning of conservatives or limiting of conservatives or hobbling of conservatives. But the other 9 are not conservatives. So
I don't know. I haven't looked into that a ton. I did see at least one study that was 2 years old that tried I mean, it's super hard to measure YouTube because it's so personalized.
Yeah.
And so people talk about, oh, we can just hit the YouTube recommendations API and see what it says. But for the vast majority of users, that's personalized, so you don't really know what people are going to get or getting recommended. But that particular study I saw a couple years ago, it actually seemed pretty inconclusive. It was hard to find weighting either way. I would not at all, if that were true, and I don't know, but if that were true, I would be very surprised if that stayed true in 2020.
Well, and YouTube, I actually feel like YouTube is the best of the bunch because YouTube wants long-form video content that is somewhat controversial and thought-provoking because that's what keeps people watching for longest. And right-wing stuff tends to do that better than like makeup tutorials or music videos. They can sell a lot more ads to a lot more people if they watch some of that longer form stuff. And so when people go out and demand that YouTube shut Steven Crowder down, I'd love to know how much money YouTube actually makes off of Steven Crowder, but there's a reason they don't kick him off. YouTube is very expensive to run. YouTube is the most expensive platform to run, probably by a long shot. And so that's one of the reasons that I feel like the Google guys that are involved in YouTube tend to be a little bit more mercenary about this. And there's a lot of channels that they don't want to kick off for very good reasons in their ad revenue strategy. And so in many ways, I feel like YouTube is friendlier to the kind of conversations that happen. And because YouTube allows for longer form conversations and communications, they end up being a little more civil than Twitter fights, where you have 120 characters and stuff gets real heated and it's just sloganeering because there is not a good way to get into deep examination of an issue.
Oh, it's a totally different platform. Like I mean, there isn't really even virality on YouTube. Like you can't easily share, maybe you can because I don't really use YouTube. You can't really easily share someone else's video to your followers. And of course, it takes forever to produce a YouTube video, so you can't have fights. It's all slower.
Yeah.
It's a totally different platform.
So that's an interesting thing that I'm actually more optimistic about T.REX hanging around on YouTube and making videos like this than what we're doing on Twitter. But what are some of the...
Using Twitter?
So we have a Twitter account.
Okay.
I log in occasionally. I try to think of something to say that isn't too inflammatory and still fits into 128 characters. And then I look at what else is going on Twitter, and then I log out. That's pretty much how it works.
All right. I think it's hooked up to the Instagram page.
Yeah, it automatically posts some of the Instagram posts to Twitter, which is not the best way to use Twitter. But one of the things that I find interesting is it's really, really hard not to argue with people on Twitter. Twitter feels like it drags arguments out of people in a way that other platforms don't.
Interesting. You find you have an urge to argue with people on Twitter when you get on Twitter?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. I don't have that.
Interesting. Well, I think maybe you're following better people.
I am. Also, I lurk a lot. I don't
Yeah.
actually produce anything on the internet. Not really.
And that brings us to one question, which is, so we've talked about how to navigate internet censorship and manipulation on the internet. It depends on what you're using the internet for. If you're using social media platforms purely to get information, you can pick other sources of information. But if you are using the internet to communicate with other people and get messages out there, it's very hard to not use the big platforms because that is where the audience is. Sadly, when the internet was new, it was extremely decentralized, but that has really changed. There really are only a few big platforms, and
It's probably a situation where, a rising tide lifts all boats.
yeah,
It's probably a net gain for everyone that these discovery platforms even exist.
oh for sure.
It used to be just Slashdot, and now you've got a whole host of content discovery platforms. And it's, people, I think, on average, have far greater reach than they did in the early 2000s.
I would agree 100%. And what we like, even look at the T.REX YouTube channel. We have almost 900,000 people following us, and we have not been building that audience for very long at all. Building that audience organically on our own website would have been extremely difficult, but YouTube has built tools to help creators to reach an audience, and those are extremely helpful. But one of the things that has happened is, as these social media platforms have created monopolies and made themselves such great tools for reaching people and communicating, the downside is they are monopolies. There's not a whole lot of competition that is out there. If we wanted to go and duplicate what we're trying to do on YouTube somewhere else, it would be very hard for us to have the same reach, because a lot of the people that we're trying to talk to are already on YouTube. They're already on Twitter, they're already on Instagram, and they're really not interested in going somewhere else. And unless they've been kicked off, though, and this is something that CNN was actually talking about last night. So Brian Stelter, who's the chief media correspondent at CNN, said, and I quote, "There's a new social media app called Parler getting a lot of attention because the conservatives are leaving, saying they're leaving Twitter and Facebook, going off to Parler because they believe Parler is a safer place for them. What we are seeing is even more of a bunker mentality in right-wing media. Ultimately, that is not good for the country." And then CNN White House correspondent Pamela Brown said, "No, it is not good. It is a threat to democracy that these people are in echo chambers and they're getting fed a diet of lies," essentially. So, I mean, first I would say lots of people are not leaving Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on purpose. Lots of people have been banned. They've had their accounts canceled and shut down. And so they're not choosing to do this. They're being kicked out.
I also love the implication that Facebook/Twitter is not an echo chamber.
Oh, man. That was what I was going to ask you about. So what is it that you would categorize as, like, I feel like the best way to categorize Facebook and Twitter and YouTube they're personalized echo chambers for you. The more that you do and interact on these platforms, the better the platform gets to know you and what you are interested in and what makes you stay on the platform longer. And then they go out and they curate a feed of stuff that fits you specifically, personally. And I can't think of a better definition of an echo chamber. Even if what keeps you on Twitter longer is showing you the political opposite of yourself so that you can fight with them, that's not actually diversifying your opinion. That's just creating a slightly echoier echo chamber in some way. So that's a really interesting thing the idea that that leaving Twitter is going to force you into an echo chamber is hilarious.
Yeah, that's patently absurd.
So another question that people have had is how much coordination is there between these platforms? Because you made the point that when Twitter tried to hide the Hunter Biden story and made it impossible for people to talk about it on Twitter, all they really did was make it impossible for people to post the link on Twitter. Not only could people still talk about it, it wasn't hidden on other platforms.
Yeah, I don't really know because this thing is super hard to find research on, and I don't follow the leaks very closely when there are leaks.
Yeah.
I mean, you said I was an expert, but I'm not an expert.
Well, you're an expert on kind of how the internet works compared to most of us, compared to the people in the chat and compared
An
to me.
expert compared to, right?
Yeah, so it would require a lot of coordination.
It would be a lot of coordination, and we've seen evidence of that kind of coordination, I think, just in the censorship that we have experienced.
Yes, so there did not
strong evidence I
seem to be coordination on the Hunter Biden thing because you could still find the story on Google. People were talking about it on other platforms. So it feels like there needed to be more coordination for that story to disappear completely. Now, on the other hand, that story was very hard to find if you did not do work to look for it. It took work, but you could still find it. There are some things that have been more coordinated, I think. And
Probably.
there was an interesting conversation between Senator Josh Hawley and Mark Zuckerberg. When was that deposition? Was that yesterday or the day before? It was in the last week. And basically, he said that he had been contacted by a former Facebook employee. There's an internal program apparently called Tasks that is used by the company to coordinate projects, including censorship, and which is no big deal. There's lots of internal platforms that a company that size would need to communicate. But apparently it also allows them to communicate with Twitter and Google so that they can all be on the same page about certain things. And there's obviously been coordination in the past. Like Alex Jones was kicked off of all the platforms the same day.
Yeah, that was super interesting.
That was interesting. But just, yeah, there seems to be a fair amount of coordination on certain things that happen across platforms on the same day or with the same lingo. So that's a very interesting thing to look at. Because once there is coordination across a bunch of monopolies, you don't have the same freedom or guarantee that information is as free as if they're actually in competition with one another.
No, yeah.
So how much power do they actually have, these tech giants?
Which power do they actually have?
Because the internet is huge, you mentioned earlier.
The internet is huge. The internet is a more interactive version of TV. And so, like there's an entire TV segment that they don't control. Maybe it's controlled by similar people. I don't know. How am I supposed to answer that question? How much power do they have? Like, am I measuring in terms of newtons, joules?
Kilotons? I'm not sure. Well, one thing is that they have different amounts of power over different people. They have less power over skeptical people who read books, for example. If you get all of your information filtered through Twitter, Twitter has a lot of power over you. If you are getting your information from a lot of different sources, then you are harder to manipulate, for sure. If you are capable of building alternative solutions for communicating with the people that you need to communicate with, then you have a lot more agency, you have a lot more freedom. So that is something that I think that all of us should be thinking about, is how much power we're letting these companies have over us. A lot of folks in the chat are making the point that they're private companies, so if you sign up, you have to play by their rules. And I agree with that. Now, one of the things that I think that these companies need to do is play by their own rules. All of these platforms talk about how they want to give everybody a voice, how they want to be inclusive, how they want to make sure that everybody has opportunities to speak. And those are not principles that they actually live out. They talk about the need for transparency and that they're not very transparent. So I'm asking for them to be more accountable and play by their own rules. I'm not asking for them to play by my rules necessarily, because I don't own those companies. But if they could just play by their own rules, that would be a huge step forward. And if they could just talk about what it is that they're trying to do and what their biases are, like a lot of the folks that the Senate people were talking to the other day couldn't define how they categorized stuff as misinformation. They took down huge amounts of posts because they were COVID misinformation or because they were election misinformation, and they couldn't define how they actually defined those things, how they actually defined misinformation. At first, they were basically saying, well, all of our COVID stuff, if it went against the CDC, that was what we took down. But the CDC changed its statements on COVID constantly, going back and forth, and the statistics changed, and the experts in charge changed. And so that was not a good standard for them to base by, and it's also just a constantly shifting standard. I would like for the companies to just play by their own rules. That would be a nice place for things to be, just for a start.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't expect postmodernists to play by their own rules.
Actually, that's a very good point. Like,
That's
a
unreasonable.
lot of
to
these
expect.
folks are postmodernists that do not believe in truth, but they're definitely going to take down lies. So how do you epistemologically
They're not very
figure that
epistemologically
out?
self-conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't make a big deal out of hounding Twitter and YouTube saying, "Oh, you guys are inconsistent." I think we should just make our own platforms, and there should be.
I think there should be a lot more of that for sure. But I do think that the platforms that we do make in the future should learn from the mistakes of Twitter and Facebook. The people running them will have biases. All people have biases, and should just be more open about those. And I'm hoping that the people who are starting Parler will do that, and other stuff like that. I think that there needs to be an effort to create things that are specifically and conscientiously decentralized. So something like Mastodon,
That's cool.
something like Matrix, like there are existing network protocols that are designed for decentralized, uncontrollable communication. And if people build with that in mind, then you end up with something that is much more open and something that is much more Orwell-proof, much more tyranny and control-proof. But if you are on these platforms, I have to be on Instagram for T.REX work.
You're right. I just got off Instagram
I'm
because
kind of envious of you.
wasting a lot of time, and Twitter. Also because we've been working very hard for Black Friday, and we've been super busy.
Well, this is actually,
I don't know anything about those hearings. I haven't been keeping up with the news.
well, so on that note, Black Friday, go quickly to our website and sign up for the newsletter for two reasons. Number one, if we lose all of our social media platforms, email is pretty much the only way that we have left to contact you. But also, if you want to know what the Black Friday is and participate in the sale, you have to be signed up for the newsletter. So
That is how
Not
it
gonna
works. You
tell
won't get
you-
you won't get any deals unless we're allowed to send you emails.
yep, and you won't find out what's actually going to be on sale unless you are on the email. We're not going to talk about it. Not going to talk about it here.
Right.
So
But I mean, you could always just visit the website like later. But we won't tell you when you need to visit the website.
well, I mean, if we're calling it a Black Friday sale, maybe they could figure out
It would be kind of
times. Yeah. Go sign up for the newsletter.
yes, definitely. It's on the front page. You have to scroll down. Go to fix.
There's other invisible platforms, or invisible to most people. Someone's asking questions about censorship at the Cloudflare and CDN and registrar network levels, level
That's a
3
cool
stuff.
question.
That's a great question because all of us see Twitter, Facebook, Google, Amazon, but there are large service providers, gigantic service providers that are invisible to most people. What are those guys like? How much control do those guys have?
Oh, Cloudflare has loads of control.
They run like half the internet right now, right?
They run DNS for about half the internet, and then they traffic. I think they run about 10% of internet traffic. So yeah, Cloudflare is massive, and they're super interesting because they're not one of the old, they're not a member of the old club, like Level 3 and a bunch of the others. They're a fairly new contender, and they have clawed their way to the top because they're awesome in a lot of ways. T.REX uses Cloudflare, and anyone, it's pretty easy to tell when you inspect the website. And really good service. To my knowledge, they have only censored 2 people. But yeah,
Stormfront and somebody else. I forget
Stormfront
who.
and 8chan.
Okay, they censored 8chan.
They
So
killed 8chan.
yeah, so this is a thing that is complicated because the internet is still technically decentralized in many ways, but there is so much stuff that runs through bottlenecks where there is control and there is the opportunity to manipulate, not just shut off information, but also manipulate information.
And I
it
guess,
becomes more
yeah.
complicated.
And one comforting thing about that whole thing is we kind of already know what the censorship battle looks like. ISPs have been trying to kill Pirate Bay for years. I don't know how long Pirate Bay has been a thing, since the early 2000s.
People have been trying to kill it for as long as it's been a thing.
Yeah, and you can't really kill it. Maybe it's because they're not really trying, because no one really cares about the DMCAA. But Pirate Bay is alive and well, and once ISPs take down, or ICANN takes down one domain, and that whole bureaucratic process takes a while before a domain can get killed. just pops up somewhere else. And so I think that whole fight and that whole chase of Pirate Bay and various other torrent tracking sites around the internet has been a fairly good example of how the internet is pretty hard to censor. And it is pretty hard to take people off of the internet. Now you can track them. ISPs can totally track their users. And for something like that, if you're concerned about that, there's Tor and various other really interesting projects that are being worked on.
We need to do a second video, which is more about overall internet security, and talk through some secure messaging protocols, for example. There's been a bunch of questions about that in our last few radio communication lives, but
we need to get a real InfoSec guy on here.
we really do. That would be nice. I have a couple people in mind, but all the InfoSec guys who are really good don't want to show their faces on a live stream and talk with their own voices, and for good reason.
I mean, that's generally true, but it's not universally true.
Yeah.
There are definitely people who are building a brand because they're contractors.
Yeah, but there's a bunch of stuff that that we should cover. So as it relates to social media and using social media, how can you manipulate proof yourself? Because you're not going to prevent manipulation on the platforms that you are using. You're not going to prevent manipulation on the internet. But how can you manipulate proof? How can you prevent yourself from being manipulatable? How do you grammatically say this correctly? How do you make yourself be more resistant to manipulation, to lies, and so forth? You can't make yourself totally resistant to censorship, but I think that if you are able to get a breadth of information and think critically about it, that helps a lot. So for example, earlier today, the Sheriff's Department of Philadelphia posted on Twitter, so it's relevant to our discussion, they announced that they were missing 210 guns. They had lost, over the last year or so, 210 guns that they were storing, and 100 actual duty firearms. Long guns, pistols, 200 guns are missing. Now, this is at the same time that there's a whole bunch of people in the established media and elsewhere claiming that all Pennsylvania ballots are accounted for, not a single ballot has been lost, not a single bit of shenaniganism has gone on, no tampering whatsoever. But at the same time, the sheriff's office has announced that they have lost 200 guns this year. So if you are getting enough information, you kind of know when certain bits of information don't line up with reality. So having a wide breadth of knowledge is one helpful thing.
That's one helpful thing. I guess I have 2 points that are at either end of the spectrum. The first thing is not related to technology at all. It's just classic epistemology. You need to be anchored in actual truth, and you need to believe that absolute truth is a thing, and you need to believe that absolute truth is, in most cases, ascertainable.
Yes.
If you can't do that, you will have a really hard time actually knowing anything and discerning anything. So that's the first step. And then probably at the other end of the spectrum, just use the internet less and
Yes.
read less Twitter, read less Instagram, and just don't jack into the matrix as often. And it's really interesting how when you're scrolling through and it just completely directs your thoughts. And that news cycle is just ridiculous. Just the amount of information that's completely irrelevant, completely unimportant.
And almost everywhere, it is things that need serious thought and time devoted to them. And you get the opposite of that. You get super tiny sound bites. You get tweets that are short, and all they can be is catchy slogans. They cannot be explanations.
Right.
They can only be attacks or insults or something that sounds good as a sound bite and not something that is fully fleshed out. And if that's all that you are doing with your brain, then your brain starts to get really rusty at the thinking through the deep stuff. And I saw a hilarious, it was probably Babylon Bee, it was one of the satire sites, and it was basically, woman's entire worldview made up of tweets by people she can't remember. And that is, that's probably true of more people than we would like to admit. That's more true of myself than I would like to admit. There are chunks of my knowledge that are informed by random tweets posted by people that I don't remember who they were. So, yeah. So read books. Books are a great way to gain knowledge that isn't being manipulated by social media platforms because they were written long ago, and they're printed on paper, and they're not alterable. They don't change even as you're reading them. So that is something that I think is really important. And all of us, I mean, including me, I was going to say especially me, but probably not especially me, all of us are using Wikipedia too much and depending on definitions that can be changed. And sending people back to references that have changed from the time that we saw them to the time that we send people to them. He who defines wins. And so that is, I think, the biggest issue with some of these social media platforms. They have the ability to not just kick people off that they disagree with, or to hide certain points of view, or to say things that are untrue, but to slowly, or sometimes quickly, just redefine stuff. So that stuff that people were saying yesterday means a totally different thing today. So they're not technically lying about what that person said yesterday, but they've recontextualized it and changed the definition so that it's no longer acceptable to say things that was acceptable to say yesterday. Like, remember that Amy Coney Barrett thing where
that was hilarious.
she said a thing. She said sexual preferences relating to people's sexual preferences. And the person who was cross-examining her immediately jumped on her for saying a phrase that is offensive. And there's no evidence that this phrase is widely held to be offensive on the internet the day that Amy Coney Barrett said it. But that changed. Merriam-Webster Dictionary changed their definition, and so that is classified as offensive the very next day. So this redefinition of words and redefinition of ideas and of thoughts is something that the older books that you can get, the wider understanding of history you can have, the better. Because people trying to change things around you is one of the things that you need to be prepared for.
And Lucas talks about fundamentals all the time.
Yeah.
And there's fundamentals in gunplay, and there's fundamentals in epistemology and thinking and tactics and war. And the internet has changed the nature of war and information warfare quite a bit, but there's a lot of fundamental principles that have been around for a really long time.
Yeah.
And reading history books is kind of a great way to learn about those.
Yeah, someone says here, Wikipedia lets the SPLC label everyone. That appears to be true. The FBI lets the SPLC label everybody. I actually feel bad that the Southern Poverty Law Center hasn't labeled us as anything. I feel kind of left out, because actually a lot of our personal friends are on the list as hate groups, even if they're only one person.
Actually, that's true. I forgot about that.
So it's a little bit almost like a badge of honor as far as I'm concerned. But no, there's ramifications to that, even though it's completely untrue. So would you recommend some books, please? I'm working on a book recommendation list. I'd like your help on some of it.
Okay.
I would love to get your input on some epistemology books. I've been mostly focused on history books for my section, but you bring up some excellent points about understanding epistemology so that you can be epistemologically self-conscious. You can actually understand what you know and why you know it. That is an incredibly important thing. And one of the other things that I'd like us to be talking about and thinking about is, I want to get back to that point. You need to have a standard. You need to not only know what you know and why you know it and how you know it and all that sort of thing, but you need to have a standard by which you actually are comparing and verifying statements that people are making. The things that people are saying are true or false. That is extremely important. Gets back to that question of fundamentals. The idea of being able to get to the fundamentals of an idea or of a concept and being able to explain it, as opposed to just have tweets that float around on the surface of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah.
That's where wisdom starts, and that's where the ability, or at least, a reasonable attempt at finding truth starts.
Yeah, because it is an unchanging transcendent standard.
Yeah.
That defines wisdom. And one of the things that I think that every time we bring up the Bible on the live, there's a bunch of haters that jump in, and all they want is everything that T.REX talks about that isn't the Bible. Conservative values, importance of self-defense, ideas for defining the world. They like all of this stuff, but then as soon as we mention the Bible, they don't like it. And that's just like so many people who are like, just talk about apples. Don't tell me about the tree, just about the apples. Just tell me about the fruit and the leaves. Never tell me about the trunk of the tree. And that's just kind of hilarious to me. that is. Like right now, it's happening right now.
Like that. Yeah, it is.
It's like
very meta.
clockwork. So one of the things that we should look into as we talk about the internet has changed the nature of warfare. Mostly, I think it's made things faster and shallower. They're not gigantic changes, but like information warfare is just faster and shallower right now.
Yeah, I mean, definitely faster, shallower. Yeah, probably.
I think those are the main things that come to my mind. What are some of the other differences?
Well, I mean, the playing field has been leveled a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone talks about how, you know, the big guys have all this power and the government has the power to manipulate you. But anybody has the power to manipulate you. Like, bot farms are not expensive. You know, you can hire...
I thought you're going a totally different direction, but I agree completely.
No, I mean, no, like, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
hire Nigerians, you can hire Indians for pennies an hour to post stuff and
yeah.
solve CAPTCHAs, and you can generate all kinds of you know, a perception of consensus on the internet for pennies on the dollar. It's cheap and it's not hard. And there's, you know, and it's not just Cambridge Analytica in 2016, you know, messing around with the election and being really smart on Facebook. It's Venezuela, it's Nigeria.
Some of the stuff that happened in Mexico in 2016
Yeah.
is phenomenally interesting to read about. So when we're telling you to be on your guard and know what you know and think about these things, we're not just saying, watch out for those Silicon Valley folks. It's kind of watch out for everybody.
Watch out for everybody, because
Yeah.
and I mean, I think that's kind of cool that the playing field has been leveled. In general, this is what technology has done. This is what the internet has done. Now anybody can be a world power if they're clever enough.
Yeah, the arms race is really quick at this point.
It's very quick.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. That's probably the main thing that the internet and technology in general has changed.
Yeah, you were mentioned earlier, it's way easier to write a Twitter bot than detect a Twitter bot.
Oh yeah.
It's been fascinating to watch that arms race and AI engines that are able to create content, and then AI engines that are designed to detect that content, and back and forth and back and forth. Advertising engines, ad blockers. The ad wars were interesting to watch earlier, and that's part of the reason I think that Google and Facebook own the ad world now, is they had the best weapons, the best anti-ad blocker technicians that were available.
And it's kind of sad. I actually think Google is losing the search engine optimization war. You know,
Yeah.
they've been locked in this arms race with I don't know, scammers who are fighting for rankings on Google. And in the past few months, Google search results have just gotten really bad lately, and it just seems like the search engine marketers finally won, and now Google stinks. It's very sad. But also, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, yeah, the fact that I have mixed feelings about it because I miss having a really solid search engine that helps me find what I'm looking for. But at the same time, it is nice that there is now an opportunity for someone to come along and do it better, and for there to be a diversity of search engines so that people are no longer looking through the same bottleneck at stuff. Like a lot of times there have been things that I wanted to find out about that Google just didn't return search results on because they were specifically hiding certain things, which is rather interesting.
Yeah.
What are some of the other questions? Separation of church and state is the foundation of this nation. Absolutely, but not in the way that you think. We don't have time to get into that here, but
It's complicated.
the church is the foundation of this nation, and the separation of church and state is a really important part of that because it tells the state and the nation not to mess with one another. The church does not answer to the state. The nation does not answer to the church, but both of them answer to God, and that idea is what this nation was founded upon.
Man, mentioning the Bible really made the comment section a lot spicier.
Oh,
People
it's
are
fascinating.
fighting each other now.
What do you think of the DuckDuckGo search engine? That's what I'm currently using. Do you have anything better?
Surprisingly good for the budget. It's I still don't think it's as good as Google, but what they've done for how much money they've had is super impressive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, use DuckDuckGo if it works for you.
Isn't Fox News the biggest cable news network? I don't know. It's hard to tell. I do think that everybody is pretty disillusioned with Fox News right now because the liberal news networks started to talk about how great they were and how courageous they were being suddenly, which, I don't know, immediately eroded everyone's trust.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to look at. But how should we close this out? What action points should we give people? You've already covered a whole bunch of them. Use the internet less. Read other stuff more. Start building a more comprehensive and deliberate worldview so that you actually know what you believe and why. Don't allow that to just be manipulated by the media that you consume. Go out and deliberately pick the things that you are going to read and the way that you are going to think about them to build that worldview, the lens that you're going to see the world through, so that it isn't just being fed to you. And that doesn't mean no use of social media whatsoever. I'd also say be encouraged by, like, we've talked about a lot of the problems with some of these big platforms, but I would say YouTube deserves most of the credit for gun culture 2.0. Like the fact that people were able to start YouTube channels and talk about guns and make it really easy to find information about guns and use of guns is phenomenally different than the 1990s. In the 1990s, the major mainstream media sources were very small, very limited. They had very comprehensive gatekeepers. Pretty much every time the news talked about guns, they only talked about gun violence. They only talked about the 14,000 murders a year. They did not talk about the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of guns that were owned by Americans that were not committing murder. And YouTube let the world see those gun owners and see what they were doing with those guns. And it completely changed the way that my generation and your generation and the next generation is going to see guns. And I think that Google realized that, and that's why they're trying to push gun channels down a little bit. But the democratization and the power that these platforms have given to little folks is tremendous. And that was the goal of a lot of these companies when they started. Part of the reason that it's hypocritical that what they're doing now is the opposite of that. So I'm encouraged by the opportunities that a lot of this technology has provided for us. But before things get completely out of control, we should start working on decentralized solutions.
Yeah, and even the decentralized solutions are not going to immune to being flooded with bots and AI-generated articles. In fact, they might be even more susceptible to that.
Yeah.
So that's only one part of creating a better internet. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone knows how they're going to deal with the AI problem. AIs are getting really good at writing articles that seem like they were written by a moderately intelligent human.
Yeah, well.
Or, just like someone who's writing their first article, But it's good stuff, and you can generate tens of thousands of articles for free, and then it's such a great way to create a perception of consensus. And that is a big problem.
And that is the next step. Right now, what some of these big content generation, what some of these content platforms are doing is there's tons of content being created by humans, and they bring you only the stuff that you want to read or that they want you to read. The next step is going to be AI engines that create the content specifically for you. So you're not even seeing what other people are seeing in terms of content. You're seeing stuff that is tailor-made to you. China is doing this with custom AI computer-generated news readers so that everybody watching the news could potentially get a completely different news story read to them by a computer-animated news reader. Like the possibilities here for societal manipulation are really interesting to think about. Cool from a technology perspective, but scary from a sociological viewpoint.
And so I kind of feel like another point of application should be get more technical and start learning about, at least the basics of, how machine learning works and what are the weaknesses of it. And, this person does not exist.com will show you a randomly generated face every time you reload the page. And on first look, it looks like a real face. But if you get familiar with how those sorts of things work, you can learn to pick out that it's not actually a real picture of a real person. And I think similar principles will apply to a lot of other machine-generated things.
Yeah.
I kind of suspect that as using AI to generate content gets out of control, the internet might become sort of an informational wasteland, and people will just have to stop using it.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
really know.
I would say we're on that way already because people that have very
Yeah.
little to say and they're just regurgitating stuff. Like we're in the middle of a remix generation where people are just remixing stuff. A huge amount of YouTube is not original content. It's people talking about original content.
Yeah,
Or
reaction
people,
videos.
Yeah, people talking about there are reaction videos of reaction videos. There are movie reviewers who don't even review movies anymore. They review other YouTube channels' movie reviews of movie reviews. This is already happening with the meat bots. Once the AI bots come in, it's going to be even more noise and even less signal. And I think that that's going to force people to pull away and search for alternatives. And especially if you are looking for substance, and if you have built your worldview around looking for substance, I think it's going to be even easier to see through the artificial intelligence stuff, the artificially generated stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Did you remember? You remember Calvin and Hobbes, obviously. I think this is the 35th anniversary of Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson's comic strip. And he quit doing Calvin and Hobbes a long time ago. And shortly thereafter, another comic strip popped up, and I can't remember the name, but it was drawn in a really similar style. And there were a bunch of people on the internet that were convinced that it was Bill Watterson come out of retirement to do this other comic strip because it was really well drawn and it was totally his style. And there were even a few little like nods to Calvin and Hobbes. And I'm going to be very rude, and I'm going to say shallow people with a shallow appreciation of the writing were convinced that it was Bill Watterson because it looked like it. But in many ways, it was the opposite of it, because if you remember, Calvin hated going to school. School was awful. Miss Wormwood was a terrible person for Calvin to interact with. Like, there was no fun nostalgia about going to school, according to Bill Watterson. And this strip was the exact opposite of that. It was all about how great school is and better than being at home. These kids loved school, and even though it looked the same on the surface, principially, it was the opposite. And so there were a ton of people like, I bet it's Bill Watterson come back out of retirement. He just wanted to draw kids in school again. But if you read the comic deeply at all, and I would say not even that deeply, you'd be like, no, this guy has the opposite worldview of Bill Watterson when it comes to government schools and public education.
I think it's hilarious
Among
that you
other
picked
things.
that example to show what shallowness is. That's
Well,
great.
Yeah, because even something like Calvin and Hobbes can be read at a superficial level, or it can be read at a deeper level. You can enjoy how beautifully it's drawn, how funny the comic is, or you can think about what the guy drawing it is thinking. There's layers to everything, even comic strips. And I would just encourage all of us, especially me, to think deeper. I'm busy enough now, and my kids are young enough that the temptation to only think about things in a superficial way as I go about what I'm doing, that temptation is really strong.
I gotta say, kids are awesome for making you think about things deeply.
Well, that's true. You're cruising along at a superficial level, and then they ask a deep question that throws you for a
Right,
loop.
and they do their why thing. They just ask why over and over again. You're like,
Yes.
I don't know. Haven't thought about that in 20 years.
Yeah, so definitely take the time to think more deeply about things and really consider how your worldview is being built. Are you building your own worldview? Or are you allowing bots to do it for you? Either, 10 cents an hour bots or Silicon Valley bots. I think that is a really important question to be asking. Build that technological epistemology for how you actually verify truth and how you define truth, and build that framework for understanding the world. And yeah, people need standards. Otherwise, anything goes.
Yep.
Nothing's definable. So, yeah, what are some of the other, sorry.
No, I mean, that's it. What are the other applications? I don't know. I'm sure there's more.
In future, we do need to talk about, we do need to find a InfoSec guy or an OSINT guy.
I know a guy. Don't know if he wants to put his face on the internet. But,
Well, earlier, before you came in here, the light was off, and we were nicely backlit, like
that would be cool.
like whistleblowers and informants. So we could do a show that way. That would
He has
be
a very distinctive speech pattern, so we would probably need to garble his voice too. I don't know.
I'm not sure if we could
Probably
figure
doesn't
that out.
matter. Yeah.
That seems like it's technically beyond us at this point.
No, it just wouldn't be alive. We would just
Yeah.
have to do it in post.
So one of the things that, don't allow YouTube personalities to tell you what you believe. Yeah, you really need to. You need to get that from someone who's not a celebrity. You need to get that from someone who's not me. You might even need to get someone who's not Noah to help you figure that stuff out. You really need to go to wiser and smarter people than us, who are not on Twitter, by the way. They're going to be people who lived a long time ago and wrote books a long time ago, and that's really something that you should be considering very deeply. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. We should have Jed on to talk about music. One of our engineers is very into music and knows a lot of people in Nashville who are heavily involved in the music industry.
Didn't know that. It's interesting.
We were talking earlier about how there are female superstars today, female music superstars, but not as many male superstars. There is a much wider variety of not blockbuster, but comfortably performing male artists, but no major superstars. And that is largely a marketing thing. It has nothing to do with talent. It has nothing to do with what the fans actually personally enjoy listening to. It is a marketing thing. The way that different marketing engines have worked to create certain people's listening habits. And that is kind of an interesting thing to talk through. But if you just allow the YouTube algorithm to create your media consumption patterns, they will also shape your worldview, and you won't even realize it. They will shape your tastes, and they will shape your interests, and it'll just happen because you didn't take the time or put in the work to do it more deliberately.
Yep.
A bunch of people asking a whole bunch of questions about night vision. That's also normal. People asking us to leak products. That's normal. Extremely normal. A bunch of people talking about Grand Thumb. Also normal. This is actually a very normal chat stream right here.
Oh, you know, Thomas Sowell does have a Twitter, and it's actually pretty great. But he also has books.
Oh yeah. So this is another thing that I think that we should do. We should in our book list point out some of these authors are still alive and some of them are on Twitter. Thomas Sowell is awesome on Twitter, but part of the reason he's awesome on Twitter is he distills the bigger ideas that he's worked out in his books into small tweets. They work okay on their own, but they work best if you understand that they are backed up by some serious work.
I don't even know if Thomas Sowell actually runs his own Twitter account. Doesn't it just post excerpts from his books?
I'm not sure. I'm not actually familiar enough with his books to know that this tweet is from page 875.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might be.
Yeah. Someone is asking, what is your tech background and education? You went to the best colleges, I'm sure.
Yes, certainly. The College of Autodidactism.
I think that's a university, actually.
Oh, yeah, it is more of a university.
Or a polytechnic.
No, all Google. Yeah, I got interested in computers when I was 12 or 13 because we needed websites, and so I started Googling around. Actually, initially, it was Lucas who was interested in websites, but then he stopped being interested in websites, and I kept on being interested in websites. So, yeah, I just taught myself programming. You can't really go to college to learn how to program because the curriculum is ancient, and by the time you graduate, your knowledge is ancient too, even if the curriculum wasn't ancient. So it's kind of pointless to learn coding or programming in college. Even if you did get a degree, you will have to keep teaching yourself because the field changes so quickly. So you have to teach yourself. That's what I did, like everyone else. And yeah, it's a very interesting industry.
Yeah, and I will say that while we have pointed out that there are some significant problems with some of these big platforms, they have enabled a lot. And I will say I'm tremendously thankful for the time that we live in and the fact that Google has made it so possible to learn things that otherwise it would have been really, really difficult to discover. Not just in the gun industry, but when it comes to learning how to code, learning how to run CNC machines. If you know how to Google stuff, you can give yourself a tremendous, tremendous education without having to go to college.
Yeah, I think that there's some dicey things in our immediate future when it comes to internet censorship and things like that, but on the whole, I am hugely optimistic about the future. I am hugely optimistic about what technology and better communication platforms and better communication technology can do to make everybody more valuable and more useful and smarter. And
Smarter and
it's
more
great.
productive.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Even though Twitter tries to do the opposite.
Yeah, though, you know, it's interesting that the average GDP of a Twitter user is higher than the average GDP of the income, I should say, of an Instagram user. So make of that what you will.
Is it because Instagrammers waste too much time taking pictures of stuff? And yeah,
I don't
hard
know
to
why.
say.
I don't know.
That is a fascinating study. The demographics of who uses these things
Yes, it is.
probably has a major impact on what they're trying to accomplish. You mentioned something earlier, even as we're talking about the pluses and minuses of some of these services. The guys running them, these are huge companies with tons and tons of people on board. And you were saying that a lot of the bad trends in some of these social media platforms aren't actually coming from the board members, but from the young, woke employees.
I think that's true. Though I mean, it's hard to say, but in general, I think that you should be able to trust board members and CEOs to be fairly mercenary and be interested in maximizing profits because that's their job. It's the rank and file programmers and lower level people who tend to be idealists and put pressure on the higher levels to become more social justice oriented.
Yeah, and to some extent the media as well. Like
And the
there
media,
have been
and whatever weird
significant-
central censorship thing is going on, I'm sure that plays a part too.
And I think it's sort of a feedback loop where mainstream media writes op-eds about how incredibly important it is for Twitter to hide election misinformation. And then Twitter does that because it's coming from the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and the usual suspects. And then as Twitter does that, Twitter also is affecting the feedback that those writers who are all on Twitter are getting from their followers and their feedback. So I think it does turn into a snowball rolling downhill.
Yeah. How much time do we have left? I keep on thinking we're going to end and then we don't.
Oh yeah, so I was watching Lord of the Rings earlier, and I'm just going to do 17 endings.
Oh,
I'll be
awesome.
done. Yeah.
I think they did have to film like 5 different endings for Game of Thrones, so no one would really know how it actually ended. That's what we're doing.
I would just say, seemed like they picked the worst one, from what I read on Twitter anyway. We are over time, so we can finish off now. Thank you so much for watching and for spending the time. Noah, thanks for coming on. I think that we should have you back to talk about other stuff. As we get through Black Friday, and again, the only way to find out about the Black Friday sale is to sign up to our newsletter. That's the only way you will know what's on sale.
It's right there.
Yes, if you
There.
can't read that, that's our website. Scroll down past the video, past the pictures, and you will see a little subscribe to our newsletter box. You can type your email in, hit the button.
Yep.
It works like the internet has been working since the late 90s. So, yeah. This talk show, whatever this is not only a YouTube Live, it is also a podcast. So if you look up T.REX Talk on your podcast thing, you can find it.
There's one more thing we need to plug.
Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah, we got some new product. Just in time for the Black Friday sale that you're not going to know anything about. Take a look at our new Nalgene bottles. This is the 32 ounce. We have a 16 ounce. It has a very cool scale on the back, but we're not going to tell you what it is. You actually have to go look it up on the website.
Sure can't read it there.
No.
Yeah.
And those came in, those got live on the website, I think, today. So
Pushed them.
we've got a bunch of stuff coming up. We have a bunch of stuff that we have to try to get through for the end of the year because sales are high, Black Friday is coming. But I will say that I would love to have you back on to talk about why we develop some of our own code at T.REX and don't use just off-the-shelf stuff, and why we use some off-the-shelf stuff and haven't developed everything ourselves. Although the answer to that is we just don't have enough time to make everything from scratch.
We don't. Nobody does, sadly.
Yeah.
But maybe someday that will change because programming will get better as a field. But who knows?
Well, so artificial intelligence will write our code for us?
Some people think that. And actually, GPT-3 did write some interesting code examples. I don't know how well that will scale. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen there?
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a very interesting future. The mainstream media platforms and the social media platforms definitely have an agenda that I think should be clearer to everybody throughout 2020. It should be a lot clearer at the end of 2020. I think it's going to keep getting clearer, but I'm optimistic about the future. You're optimistic about the
Very
future.
optimistic.
People watching should be optimistic about the future, but they should also be doing the hard work of developing standards, fundamentals, a good worldview, a framework for understanding what they read in the media, what they read in books, etc., and what they listen to on podcasts like this one.
Right.
That was not a great closer, but that's where we're ending the show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you next week. Possibly Lucas will be here next week.
Possibly.
You never know.
You never know.